We've been talking about 3 areas of faith. In the first video, we talked to you about how Abraham received the promise of God. And then we talked to you about how Abraham left Haran and pursued the promise of God. And then in our last video, we talked to you about how Abraham was living in the promise of God by faith. And now we're going to talk to you about how Abraham was looking ahead in faith. You see, it takes faith in order to look ahead. It takes faith in order to believe into the future. In verse number 10 of Hebrews, the 11th chapter, it says this, "For he was looking for a city which it has foundation, whose architect and builder is God." What was Abraham doing in faith? He was looking. He was looking ahead. Abraham was looking for a city that God had promised him. He was looking ahead. You know, Abraham never lived in that city, but he was looking ahead to a city. And you see, we as believers need to make sure that we are constantly looking ahead. Now, how many of you realize that if you're always looking behind, you're not ever going to look ahead, and you're not ever going to get to the place that God's got for you? We sit here in a wonderful studio that God has provided with good equipment, great equipment that God has provided. Well, you know what? That didn't just happen. That happened because I was looking ahead in faith, talking about this place, talking about these cameras, talking about using the media to spread the gospel around the world. You see, we as believers must constantly be looking ahead, looking towards the promise that God had for us. You see, that's what Abraham was doing. Abraham was looking to be a city. He was looking to be a populated area. Even though he had no children at all, he was still looking ahead and seeing something that didn't exist and only existed in his mind and in his spirit by faith. Let me ask you a question. What are you looking for? What is your faith applied for future? You see, faith is always something that's future. If you've got it in front of you, it doesn't take faith. Now, I have a Bible in front of me here. It doesn't take faith. I'm not saying, well, I'm believing God for a Bible. No, it's here. So faith is always projecting itself into the future. What are you looking at? Are you expecting God to bless you? Are you expecting God to prosper you? Are you expecting God to heal you, deliver you, to be walking with you, to leading you, to guiding you, to showing you? Are you expecting? Are you looking forward in faith? Now let's look at what Abraham was looking for. He was looking for a city. But now it tells us that this city had a foundation. In other words, Abraham was looking into the future and saying, this is going to be permanent. How many of you know when you're living in a tent, it's not permanent? That tent's not designed to stay there forever. But when you lay a foundation and you build a foundation, that you understand that this is something that's permanent. And Abraham is looking for a place that's completely permanent, a city that's not going to leave. But then we go on and we find out that Abraham is looking for a city whose architect is God. In other words, he's not looking and being the planner of this city. He's not saying, okay, we're going to put this here and that there and this here and this here. No, what he's saying is God's going to put the plan together. God's going to work this out. Now, how many of you know that takes faith? Because sometimes, just like Abraham, we leave the place we're in not knowing where we're going, but we have to trust that God is the architect. We have to believe and walk in faith, believing that God is the architect. He's got the plan. He's the one that's putting this together. He's the one that's putting us into associations with other believers. He's the one that's building and opening doors and closing doors. That He is the one that's doing it. So what kind of city was Abraham looking for? He was looking for a city with a foundation, but he was also looking for a city that God planned, that God was putting together. And then the last thing that Abraham was looking for, he was looking for a city that God built. You see, when you walk by faith, it takes the pressure off of you. There's times in my life where I just have to say, okay, God, this is yours. You have to do it. I can't do it. You see, God is not only the architect, but He is the builder. He is the one who takes the plan and puts it into place. Now, what do? We just respond to Him by faith. We just say, okay, God, that's what I'll do. Okay, yeah, I'll do this. Yep, I'm believing that. And you see, God is the builder of our city. You see, Abraham never saw this city completed, but Abraham's heirs did. Abraham's family continued the faith of Abraham. They continued on in what Abraham saw. And even to this day, the nation of Israel is continuing to walk in the blessings of Abraham. But not only for natural Israel, but for the church. We are walking in the blessings of Abraham. Why? First of all, because Abraham believed in faith. He believed the promise of God. How do we do it? How do we continue ahead in the promises of God? We do it by faith. You may not see all the things that God's promised you, but you know what? They'll come true. They'll come true through those who you have affected. Maybe it's through family members. Maybe it's through people that you've mentored and discipled. But the promise of God will always take place as long as we walk by faith.